When I sat down after making my video on what happened to Breath of Fire, I looked down at my what happened to list considering which game or series to cover next. Yes, I do have a list and it seems to be growing faster than I can make videos. On that list, I couldn't help but notice just how many classic JRPGs were on there that either vanished into the night or ended up not getting the send-off that they deserved, becoming app games or, pachinko machines. On this channel, I've already looked at one-offs or series such as Suikoden, Breath of Fire, Shadow Hearts, and Vagrant Story. Links to those episodes are in the description below, but this is just a drop in the ocean of games I plan to cover, and it's one of their number that forced me to ask that inevitable question: what happened to The Legend of Dragoon? Hello everybody, I'm Roy McCoy, and the focus of this video is the cult classic, The Legend of Dragoon. In this video we'll talk about its development, what it was, its release and reception, before moving on to talk about the future of this much loved game, and also addressing the remake rumours. Before we crack on, please do give this video a like, as it really helps me out, and increases the chances of this video getting seen. See? As in all decent RPGs, your choices matter. But after that random segue, let's get down to what happened to The Legend of Dragoon. Our story begins in the year 1996, in what was the start of a 3-year development cycle. Created by Japan Studio, an in-house first-party Sony developer, the project started out small, as the studio were also working on Ape Escape and Ico at the same time. The Legend of Dragoon was directed by Yasuyuki Hasebe and produced by Shuhei Yoshida, a name you might recognise as belonging to the person who became president of SIE Worldwide Studios for Sony Interactive Entertainment from 2008 to 2019. I also talked about him in my What Happened to Demon's Souls video in relation to his comments that Demon's Souls was an unbelievably bad game after playing it for 2 hours, a title that Sony decided not to localise in the West, and the game only made it to the rest of the world thanks to streamers and third-party publishing. I'll link the video down in the description in case you want to check out more about that interesting piece of gaming history. However, back to The Legend of Dragoon. It was one of Yoshida's last games before he became president, and after small beginnings, the team by the end was made up of around 100 people and had a budget of $16 million, which was huge for a PS1 game. The end product was released on 4 CDs, the maximum the PS1 jewel case could hold, and the game featured stunning CGI cutscenes, 3D character models that moved through pre-rendered 2D environments, and a combat system that was a mix of turn-based and real-time. It also had something called Addition, effectively a quick-time event, which made the combat more dynamic by making the players press buttons when 2 squares moved over each other. And if I'm totally honest, The Legend of Dragoon is one of my favourite old-school classic JRPGs from the PlayStation 1 era. However, I do understand it does contain certain flaws and faults that some people may not enjoy. But I wanted to be honest when I say I am very much one of those fans that want to see a remake or a sequel. The game does follow the typical JRPG format. A young, unsuspecting hero gets somehow dragged into a bigger conflict while teaming up with a bunch of other heroes before moving on to save the world. And that's exactly what it does in this game. And for me, the story worked well, but for some critics, much of the criticism was levied at the fact it did nothing new, and some people said that it mirrored very much the story of Final Fantasy VII. In my opinion, something that set apart The Legend of Dragoon from other titles at the time was the intensity of the start. Right at the beginning, you had a stunning CGI intro, and then the whole introduction section of the game was really fast-paced. You started off as the protagonist Dart, who is out hunting for a monster. He returns towards his village. He gets attacked by a dragon. He's saved by a mysterious woman. Heads to the village, saves some people, and then rescues his best friend. Now, what I would like to say is the rest of the game carried on at this pace, but sadly, it didn't. And while some people may love this element, the game was also crammed full of lore and backstory and history. Now, this game was the perfect start to a franchise in terms of world building, but we just didn't get a sequel. And there are also other people that state quite simply, the game starts and finishes. It wraps it up nicely, and there is no need for a sequel. In fact, if anything, there's probably more of a need for a prequel to discuss that previous history. The game released towards the end of the PlayStation 1's life cycle on December 2nd, 1999 in Japan, which was around 3 months before the PS2 launched. The game arrived in North America on June the 13th, 2000, just over 4 months before the PS2 arrived, and Europe brought up the rear again, getting the Legend of Dragoon after it got the PlayStation 2. Now, I specified this because sometimes games can be affected by the timing of release at the end of a cycle, which is something that I talked about in my Vagrant Story video, which came out slightly later than this game. However, despite all that, it seemed to sell really well. Upon releasing in Japan, The Legend of Dragoon reached second place in sales behind Pokemon Gold and Silver. By the end of 1999, the game had sold over 280,000 copies in Japan. However, interestingly enough, and it's something I will touch on later, is that apparently, according to Yoshida, sales in North America and the United States were stronger than in Japan. And to be honest, I think there's two reasons that the game sold worse in Japan and better in the United States. First of all, it was the covers, although I don't think this is a major factor. If you compare the North American, European, and Japanese cover, you'll notice that the North American and European versions both had people and characters on the front, and Japan was a little bit like, I mean, what is that? But I think the real reason that it didn't sell as well in Japan as it did in North America is that at the time of release, a lot of gamers in Japan claimed that the game was just too hard. And between the time of release in Japan and North America, the team had balanced the game. The game also received generally positive reviews, and many praised that beautiful CGI and overall feel, but the feeling was that it did nothing new, comparing it to Final Fantasy VII, especially in terms of story, that typical JRPG story once more. And as of making this video, the game stands at 74 on Metacritic. Now, despite decent returns, the sales weren't spectacular. Certainly not as much as Sony hoped, which could have been down to timing, or unspectacular reviews, or even the difficulty issue in Japan. However, the game was still solid, enjoyable, and I honestly loved it. And it also got a big cult following, and there was definitely a call for a sequel at the time. According to a PSN blog post from 2012, Yoshida said, "I still occasionally hear from fans of The Legend of Dragoon, and many want to know if there is a sequel. The Legend of Dragoon 2 was put into pre-production after I left the Japan studio, but was eventually cancelled for some unknown reason, and the team members moved on to different projects. Some people still work in the Japan studio, so we talk about the memories of The Legend of Dragoon when we see each other at company functions." The game did release later on the PlayStation Network and topped the PlayStation Classic sales chart, and remained in the top 5 for the next 3 months, and was only second, ironically, on that top 5 list to Final Fantasy VII, the game it got compared to. So now let's talk. So that was all what the game was, the development and the release. Now let's talk about those rumours, and could we ever see another one? On the 22nd of August 2019, Peter Dalton, who is a director at Bluepoint Games, said this in answer to a question: "I love The Legend of Dragoon. Perhaps it should be a project?" And it led to a spate of replies from fans who wanted the remake. Many people picked up on this tweet as a sign that Bluepoint Games, who worked on the Shadows of the Colossus remake and also made the Demon's Souls remake that launched on the PlayStation 5, and hoped they were secretly working on the Legend of Dragoon remake. Later in that year, in September of 2019, Shuhei Yoshida said that he knew of the demand for it, but hasn't heard of it being in production. And actually, if we look at that original tweet, it merely just says, maybe it should be a project. Peter sounds like he's speaking as a fan, and he is opening a question up. Now, of course, it could be a sign, and it could be a moment that he thinks, oh, maybe this is a good idea. But at the end of the day, it just sounds like he's speaking as a fan, rather than confirming the project is happening. So that leads me on to asking the question, could we ever see another one? Well, one of the things I talked about during my What Happened to Killzone video was Sony's current strategy. Now, when you think of the games that Sony are making, those first-party titles, most of them are strong single-player adventures, usually ARPGs, things like God of War, Uncharted, The Last of Us. Yeah, sure, they make some racing games like Gran Turismo, and there are some other offerings out there, but there are some things that I believe are totally missing from their catalogue. Things like a lack of multiplayer games, especially online multiplayer, and also first-person shooters, which are both things that Killzone did. And also, pretty much since PlayStation 1, we haven't seen many first-party JRPGs. And at the moment, with the lack of JRPGs being produced by Sony, I have a sad feeling that games like The Legend of Dragoon aren't high up on their list. However, maybe that will be addressed, and I'm gonna once again talk about that Eiyuden effect. Suikoden was one of the greatest JRPGs I have ever played. Suikoden 2 was even better, and the whole series is something that I love. Now we have Eiyuden coming, the spiritual successor, and looking at it, it very much has the feel of that old school PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2 JRPG. If that sells well, we could well and truly see a rise and a return of these kind of games. So yes, maybe it will be addressed. Maybe it will come back. And I would definitely like to see it. It's not totally out of the remit of those single player games. However, I don't imagine it would be a sequel. I could imagine a remaster and quite possibly a remake. If Bluepoint Games took it on, I think it would be sensational. A game like this built up from scratch, still in that kind of traditional format, I think it would be a huge success. Not only for gamers looking for that nostalgic feel, but also for modern gamers. So if they were going to make it, I would put my money on it being a remaster, with it preferably being a remake. However, unless there is a shift in Sony's direction at the moment, I'm not overly positive it's coming anytime soon. So for me, the remake or remaster of this game is a strong maybe, and something I really hope to see. I do think it's got more chance than something like Vagrant Story or Breath of Fire, but I am still erring on the side of caution with this one for now. Let me know in the comments below which other games you'd like to see on my What Happened To list. It might already be on my list, but I'm more than happy to add some other suggestions if they're not already there. But from me today, all it leaves me is to say thank you very much for watching, and this is Roy McCoy, out!